The episode archive of Your Creative Push is now easier than ever to navigate. Head to yourcreativepush.com and click episodes at the top. There you'll see all the episodes listed by date and by genre. Every episode of YCP is meant to inspire you, regardless of your creative passion, but you can now easily find the ones that fit your creative medium when you need a little extra push. Your Creative Push, episode 239.
I want you to create every day without thinking about who's going to buy this. It restricts your flow of creativity.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Maria Brophy. Maria has been an art agent to her husband, Drew Brophy, very talented artist, since 2001, and she's been a business consultant to creative entrepreneurs since 2009. She has this wonderful book out called Art, Money, and Success, which is a must-have if you are thinking about starting a creative career. And this is a great episode for you if you are thinking about doing that. We talk about her experience of leaving her full-time job, a very lucrative full-time job to help her husband, Drew, with his art career, and how you can make a slow transition into the new creative career that you want to make for yourself by cutting back your work week to 3 or 4 days to start. We talk about what led her to create her book, Art, Money, Success, and why it took her so long to start writing, and why it took her so long to finish after she started. One of the big things we talked about was the value in seeing it as a numbers game, and not being too distraught with the rejections. And we use myself in this podcast as an example of that. And finally, we talked about the notion that success loves speed and how ideas have the best chance for success if they are explored right away. Tons of wonderful stuff in this episode, and I know that you're going to love this, my conversation with Maria Brophy. Enjoy. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we're very, very glad to have you on. So before we get into your book and kind of what you do, I was hoping maybe you could give us a brief bio, kind of how you got to the point you are today, your story, if you will.
Okay, sure. So in a nutshell, I was in the insurance industry for many years. And then I met an artist who was making a living painting surfboards. And we fell in love and we got married. And he convinced me to leave my pretty solid job to work with him and sell his art. And that was in 2003. So that was a very long time ago. And so I left this cushy job to figure out how to increase my husband's art sales as a surf artist. And that's really where this whole journey began. And, you know, it's been a journey because it's been great and it's been difficult. And the lessons that I've learned have been so, let's just say I had to really figure out how to do it to survive living in Southern California off of a surf artist's work. Right. And that's what led me to write the book about it.
Right. Yeah, and before we get into the book and stuff, what was that like? Because I think a lot of people that are listening are kind of on that borderline of, you know, should I continue doing my job that, and I know in your book you said how you kind of hated your job before. Like, should I continue doing that, or should I go into this new thing, this art, this thing that I love, whatever the creative passion is, and try to find a way to make money, which you very eloquently illustrate how to do in the book. But just take us back to your mindset then when it's like, all right, do I really leave this security? Do I leave this job? Do I leave this comfort of this thing that I've been doing for so long, even though I maybe don't like it?
Yeah, and you know, I'm really glad you asked that question because people don't realize the more money you make, the harder it is to quit your job. And I was actually doing really well. I was making 6 figures selling insurance. And it wasn't so much that I hated my job. It just was meaningless to me. And I wasn't able to live a traveling lifestyle, which is what I always dreamed of. And the reason it's so hard to leave a job where you're making good money is because it's crazy. It's the craziest thing in the world to do. What? I'm going to quit this job that is my security, and it took me years to get to where I am. to start at zero again. And we didn't have any money in the bank because, I don't know, we just didn't. It wasn't like I was quitting my job and I had a cushion. There was no cushion. But what led me to quit it was this. I had been working with Drew part-time for about 5 years. Drew's my husband, Drew Brophy. So I was working with Drew on the weekends while I was going to my normal job during the week. And I loved working with him. And he kept begging me to quit my job. Quit your job and work with me. We'll figure it out. And I literally thought about it for years before I finally got the guts to leave that job. And what did it was I got a giant fight with the vice president of the company that I worked at. It was such a big fight that we were screaming at each other in the boardroom in front of about 8 other people. And that I'm grateful for, because the very next day I went into my boss's office and gave my notice, and I had no idea, how things were going to work out. And I called a friend of mine who was a writer, and she had done something similar where she had a secure job. She quit it to be a full-time writer. And I said, Lauren, I'm really scared. I think did I just make a huge mistake? And she said, Maria, leaving my job was the best thing I ever did. I'm writing full time. This is all I ever wanted to do. You're never going to regret this. And that was really all I needed to hear. I just needed somebody to tell me you're going to be okay. Really, after that, I dug my heels in. Together, Drew and I said, okay, now we have to, double, triple Drew's sales just to, replace the money that I was making. How are we going to do it? And we figured it out. And it was, it wasn't that easy in the beginning, but it worked. It worked. And I think being stubborn and hard-headed and determined really helped.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being ignorant to the mountain that you have to climb or the things that you are going to expect, the hardships that you're going to encounter, making that change is definitely a good thing. Because if you knew like all the hardships and all the trials and tribulations, maybe it would keep you at that job that you don't like. But I like what you said, it makes a lot of sense too, what your friend said, having that thing that, fulfills you monetarily, but you're completely unfulfilled doing it every day. And I think that it's hard to make that transition, but like with resources like your book, that people can kind of at least see the light or see how it can get done.
Yeah. And, one thing I want to point out to anybody out there that's listening and they're in that position where they're like, my job is my security, but I really want to do this creative thing. And making that jump is so freaking scary, and it could be really stupid, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, but I really want to do it. If you're really on the fence, I have a good recommendation. And one of the artists that I work with, I recommended this to him, and it's worked out great. He's an engineer, and he was in that position. Great job as an engineer, and he wants to be an artist, right? And he was already selling his art, a little bit here and there on the weekends when he could make time to go off and do shows and things. But he wasn't ready to make that huge leap. And I said, why don't you put together a proposal for your boss and cut your hours back to 4 days a week? And he said, oh, they won't let me do that. There's no way. Nobody else is doing that. There's no way they're going to let me do that. And I said, look, put the proposal together. This is what I propose. I'm going to be here Monday through Thursday. I will take a 20% cut in pay. And this is what I propose, how you're going to, what I propose you do with that extra workload and solve the problem for your boss before you give them a problem. So anyway, long story short, he took the advice and he did it. And he actually went kind of crazy with it. And he ended up cutting back to 3 days a week. And that was his transition. And he did that for a couple years until he got his art business doing well enough to where he finally let go of that engineering job. You can transition your way into it. You don't have to do it all at once.
It's very interesting you say that. I've been talking about that with my wife a lot in the past year because especially since I started this podcast, I've mentioned this before, but how much I hate my job now, now that I realize how much I love like podcasting and I like want to get to my creativity and stuff like that. And I was saying, if I went part-time, if I like only worked 2 or 3 days a week, that I would actually, I think, enjoy my job. Like, I think it would be okay, because I think the reason that I hate it so much is because I feel like it's taking away from all my time to, get to my creative passions. So I love that idea of, being able to taper off a little bit. And also for people, if you're able to kind of get into that situation, you still have that security. It feels safer, but also you can really see if this is something that you want to do once you spend more time doing it. It would be a shame to kind of quit your job to do this thing that you don't have that much experience in and you're not quite used to yet. And you realize that you actually don't like that and you still need to pivot into a different kind of creative field. So that gives like a little bit of like leeway there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get into your book a little bit. Like I said before, it's kind of like a really great guideline for people that are thinking about making their art their career or making money out of their art. So can you kind of take us through like why did you create the book and who is it for?
Okay, so the book is called Art, Money, Success. And I think that's such a perfect title for it because it's all about finding your success financially as an artist, because I find that is one of the artist's biggest struggles. How do I make money? And the way I got what led to this book was in 2009, I started a blog, and it's at mariabrophy.com. And I started this blog because I had so many artists coming to me and Drew both saying, how do you guys do this? How do you do that? I see Drew's art on boogie boards. How's he getting his art on boogie boards? I see Drew's art on flags, on the city street flags. How do you do that? And then the questions would be, oh my God, I got ripped off by this client. How do I solve that problem? It's just problem after problem after problem. And I felt like I realized I had a lot of the solutions just because of the things that I had figured out. And so I started writing this blog. And then I started collecting emails, and I did this 11-week. If you sign up for my email, you would get 11-week coaching by email. And that got such an amazing response because I was teaching people how to find their niche and how to solve money problems and how to sell their art. I said, oh my gosh, this is a book. And I've always wanted to write a book. I mean, when I was a kid, I dreamed of writing books. So this is not a new thing for me. It's just a shame I took this long in my life to do it. And that's a whole nother topic about being afraid to do what you want to do. And we can talk about that. But I don't think I had the confidence, but it's the best stuff that I could come up with. And really this book, it's a big book. I mean, it's almost 400 pages. And that was after I cut out about 300 pages. And I kept wanting to add more, and I had to stop myself because there's so much that people need to know.
How long did that take you? 700 pages.
Oh my God. 3 years to write this book. 3 years, which is ridiculous. And the reason, now my next book will not take me that long. My next book will probably take 1 year from start to finish to publish, because now I know how to write a book, and I know that I wasted 2.5 years writing this book, and I should have just done it all a lot faster. But I think a lot of it was being afraid. It was really scary. I really procrastinated a lot in the last 4 months releasing this book. It should have been released months before it was. And that procrastination was fear. I was afraid. The main thing I was afraid of was that my husband, Drew, was going to get pissed off at me because I put a lot of our pricing in the book. And he doesn't read my stuff. I know people are going to think that's really not kind of him to not read my stuff, but he's not a reader. He likes to listen to things or listen to videos and lectures. And that's how he studies.
My wife doesn't really listen to the podcast. She likes to read. So
that's funny. I do both.
Yeah.
I do both. But So I was afraid he was going to be like, why did you tell people that? Why did you put that in the book? Why did you tell them we charge this much? Why did you, and then the other thing was, it was the money thing that scared me the most because of all the dollar amounts that I put in there, like how much we charge for licensing, how much we charge for just different things. And the reason I was afraid of it is because I didn't want to be judged by people who make a lot more money than us, who will say, geez, I thought Drew was really successful. How come he's not charging, twice as that? And then the people who were making like way, way less than us, which, we're all at different levels. And I was afraid that those people would say, geez, is she bragging about this? Or is this exaggerated? It was just that being afraid. And then finally I just said, you know what? Screw it. Mm-hmm. Bring on the criticism. I've got to grow up one of these days. I've got to be able to handle it.
That's really interesting, though. The idea that, you do this thing and you're like right at the end of it, and all of a sudden these other fears like kick in, and it's like, oh, this is a real thing now, and oh, now I have to like face these imaginary critics, because I understand what you're saying about people that are on different ends of your spectrum, people that are making less and people that are making more, and how they're going to judge you. But in reality, they probably don't care, and they're going to learn something from, where you're at in your stage. You know what I mean? And I actually reached a point too where I've been thinking about reaching out to advertisers, and this goal that I made for myself was, I want to redo my episode 0. I talk about how awful episode 0 is all the time because it was the first time I talked into the microphone. I was like a completely different person, and it doesn't convince anybody to listen to the podcast, in my opinion. So I was like, oh, I have to redo episode 0 before I reach out to advertisers. Yeah. And actually a few other things, like I had to do that. It was like this like clog, in my sink. Fix that before I could let all these other ideas that were like welling up, go through. And I finally did that, and I'm finally reaching out to advertisers. But it's interesting that I think not getting to that episode 0, which took me, I don't know, like 2 hours to like do, it's like that wasn't that huge of a task to redo. But I think it was a lot of fear, fear of reaching out to advertisers. What if they say no? Like, what if I can't monetize this podcast and make this into my living? It's like all those fears that kind of stop you from doing that thing when you're at like 95% of your goal.
Yeah, well, the thing about reaching out to advertisers, it's the same as selling art. It's the same thing. It's like you have to realize that for every 20 people you contact, maybe one will say yes.
Right.
And it's a numbers game. And if you can think of it as a numbers game, so I was just at my Toastmasters meeting last night, which I hadn't been to in a really long time. And this guy was talking about sales, and I don't know what industries he's in, but he said, yeah, we did this push where I had to make 1,500 phone calls with the goal of getting 30 new signups.
Oh.
And he said it was, I forget, it was like 2 week period of time or something. So literally he was on the phone all day, every day, making 1,500 phone calls, and he wasn't finished until 1,500 places were called. You think about that, like you have to be okay with people saying, no, your art or your podcast is not for everyone. There's going to be people who absolutely love it, and there's going to be people who hate it. You have to be okay with that.
Right. And the fact that you kind of want people to hate it. Like, you don't want it to be this like middle of the road, something that everybody can kind of like a little bit. You want people to be able to love it enough to buy it, especially when we're talking about visual artists or writers. You want somebody to connect to it. And if somebody's going to connect to it that much, then there's going to be people that just completely don't connect to it at all. Yeah.
There's an artist that I work with. He's in Spain actually, and he's working on these illustrations. He just, it's amazing. He just started drawing like in January, and his illustrations are so good. I think he always had it in him. He just never did it because he's done other things. And anyway, now he's all excited, like thinking that he can license these illustrations, which they are absolutely licensable to like tech companies because of the nature of the illustrations. It's like stick figures, but with so much energy and personality. It's kind of amazing that he can put that much in there. And anyway, his goal is to be licensed and, have his work create a residual income and so forth. And I'm working with him and I said, look, you need to just create every day. We're not going to talk about licensing. We're not going to talk about who we're going to sell your art to. We're not going to talk about that until January. Okay, what are we in July right now? And he said, no, I don't want to wait that long. I said, nope, we're not even talking about it until January because I want you to create every day without thinking about who's going to buy this or who's going to want it. Because when you're thinking that, it restricts your flow of creativity. So he's been listening to me. And then just the other day, he said, yeah, I'm really, for some reason, I'm drawing these very cynical cartoons. And I don't want to show them publicly because they show my dark side. And I said, well, send them to me. So he sent them to me. And one of them was a very cynical illustration. Imagine like a one shot comic strip, right? And it's about this guy at a wedding, and he says something very negative, very cynical, but it's actually really funny about these people getting married, about marriage. Mm-hmm. And it is very cynical, but I thought it was hilarious, even though I am a firm believer in marriage and I'm happily married. I thought it was funny, but I could see his hesitation with showing it publicly because it's going to turn some people off, but it's going to make a lot of people love him, really love his work, because a lot of people feel that way and they're going to relate to it. So if you can evoke feelings of hatred alongside feelings of laughter and fun, depending on the person looking at it, I think you really hit on something.
And then what would your advice to that guy be going forward? Like you said, you really connected with that drawing, that illustration. Would you suggest that he maybe create an alias, or not put it on his personal account, or create a second thing, or just kind of keep that work private?
And that's great because he asked me that exact question. And I said, look, right now, I don't want to name him for this reason, but sure, his public persona is the opposite of cynical. It's just the dark side of him, right? So I said, look, for now, keep it to yourself if you want, okay? But keep creating it. Build up a plethora of these cynical, funny cartoons, and further down the road, we'll figure out what to do with them. But right now, I'm really encouraging him to just focus on having fun creating them. Oh, and then he did end up posting one of them, which I was really happy to see because, I don't know, I think it's okay if you have a little bit of a dark side. It's all right. You don't have to be perfect. People don't expect people to be perfect all the time.
Right. And it's also encouraging because for me, for my writing, I'm very cynical with my writing, yet on the podcast, I'm very encouraging. It's okay to have different voices. And then I also like to write different things, in a kind of a different voice, a very romantic, the universe is wonderful place type of voice too. It's okay to have these different voices and to dabble in different kind of expressions of yourself, because that's the way you kind of figure out how you feel about the world, and it's self-therapy too.
Yeah, I love that you do that. That you it's almost like you have multiple personalities.
Yeah, I think because we all do. It's just you kind of define in real life, you define yourself by a certain mentality, and you don't let yourself change. And I think it's really important to be able to just figure out what you feel about the world and have those split personalities come out. It's good to have a resource for that.
Well, you're showing who you really are. You're showing the different sides of yourself. And in this day and age where everybody's only showing their perfect side on Facebook and social media, which really, after a while, makes me sick. Authenticity, people are craving it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into the book a little bit more. You have a lot of great advice in it, and one of the best ones I like, and we've kind of, I guess, touched on it a little bit with our kind of talking about procrastination, but this idea that success loves speed. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. When you get like this brilliant idea and it like hits you and you're like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. I've got to do it. But then you hesitate. And then you think, well, I'll take action on that tomorrow because you're not sure what to do. And so that turns into procrastination. Well, then a week goes by and then you end up doing nothing with it. And 3 months later, you see somebody else had the same idea and they did it. And now you're like, hey, that was my idea. And look, they're doing it and they're getting all this attention and they're making all this money or whatever. Damn, why didn't I take action on it? So you really have to take action on things quickly. You can't sit around. So when somebody reads my book, I want them to take action now. Like when you read one of the first chapters is figuring out what you want out of life. I give these exercises like write down what you want. Don't go to the next chapter, like do it now because taking action now, I mean, obviously it's going to result in getting to the next step, making things happen. Too many people just kind of sit around and do nothing. And I admit I'm kind of guilty of that myself sometimes. So I have to constantly remind myself to move faster. Mm-hmm. And even if all your ducks aren't in a row. So like with your, getting people for your podcast, getting advertisers, you didn't really have to go back and redo that first podcast. Right. You really didn't. You wasted time doing that. And you might have, and I'm not trying to, throw you under the bus right now.
No, throw me hard.
I'm just using this as a perfect example. You came up with this idea. It's time to get advertisers. You should have just gotten on the phone right away and started calling advertisers. That's what I mean by success loves speed, because you would have made more progress had you done that and not worried about podcast zero, which, by the way, probably none of those advertisers are going to listen to it anyway.
Right. Well, yeah, I love what you're saying. And that spark of an idea thing is so prevalent. And I know Liz Gilbert talks about it in Big Magic about how like ideas are like living and they want a host. That's the reason they inspire you so much and give you that like, oh, this is a great idea, because they want to like come into the world like right away. And then if you're not willing to be that host for them, like they're going to move on to something else. And then you're going to just be very regretful that you didn't make that. So when you get those ideas, I always try to promote that on the podcast. At the very least, write it down, like make it into something real, like something tangible in the real world, and just start that kind of creative process to like create it,
Yeah. If you, and what I think goes perfectly with that. And by the way, that was like one of my favorite parts out of her book. What you just, that was such a good book of hers. So a lot of times those inspired ideas come within days or even hours of you making a declaration of something you're going to make happen. So let's say, you decide, and this is a real decision, you want to become known as the person who painted. Well, I'm trying to think of a good example here. You want to become known for something specific, right? So like when you're sitting down and you're going, okay, what do I really want from my life as an artist? Well, gosh, I want to be known as I want to be the best known surfboard artist in the world. I'll just use that as an example. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I'm going to become the best known surfboard artist in the world. I have no idea. But this is my decision. This is something I'm going to put my focus on. And then 3 hours later, you're running on, you're having a run, or you're working out, or you're doing, you're gardening. And all of a sudden you get this crazy idea in your head. Hey, what if I travel to Spain and I work with surfboard shapers there and I paint their surfboards, and, we do this like neat campaign, like just some crazy idea pops into your head. That idea came from the decision you made earlier that's going to lead you to your end goal. And then that's where the speed comes in. You gotta act on it right away, because it came to you as like a divine inspiration, because the universe, the world, or your higher self wants you to be successful in the decisions that you consciously make. And that's why it's so important to know exactly what it is that you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like building up the like idea muscles and declaring it. Like, I think that's beautiful because it's perfect, because you get to declare it to yourself. You get to convince yourself that this is a real thing. Like if you let that idea or that idea of a future career or like a big idea sit in your head for too long, like the doubts will start to eat it away and like give you all these reasons why it's not a real thing or it shouldn't be a real thing. So if you put it out on paper or start to tell yourself or start to tell your friends, then you're basically announcing to the universe, like you said, which I love, that this is the thing that you want. And it's like, okay, like this guy or this girl wants this inspiration, and will, like you said, like sometimes you'll get it at a really rare moment, but when you get it, to like stop gardening, like run inside, write that idea down, and let that like kind of stream of inspiration and ideas come to you, and get them out as quickly as you can, and start to develop that plan. Like sometimes just sitting down, which I love, and which we can get into next. You talk, like you have these worksheets in your book, and you want people to stop and think for an hour, which I love. Just think about this thing, like whatever kind of goal you have next, and write it down, and which I think is really important. But sometimes the ideas aren't ready for you, and when they do come later on, maybe that day, that week, like you said, to just be ready, like to just be like on call, essentially.
Yeah. I think about, like, when I think about all the really cool things some of the artists are doing out there, like and I wrote about this in my book, and I'm talking about it because I still just love it so much. There's an artist named Amanda Giacomini, and she spent some time in India. She practices yoga and meditation, and she's married to a musical artist named MC Yogi, who I've been to his concerts. I love him. And it's funny because I've been following her art for a long time and never realized that she was married to this musician whom I love his music. But anyway, she spent some time in India, and she was very much inspired by images of Buddha. And she came up with this idea. She decided she was going to paint 10,000 Buddhas. 10,000. And what she does is she paints these Buddhas, like she'll paint a mural on a giant wall, and there'll be like 100 Buddhas just in that one mural, because there's rows of Buddhas, like 20 Buddhas in a row, just row after row after row of Buddhas. And she has this very cool style. And when she first came up with that idea, and I've never talked to her about it personally, so I'm assuming when she first came up with that idea, I know she didn't know which wall she was going to paint all these Buddhas on, and she didn't know, how many. She also paints them on like pieces of wood and canvas and paper and so forth, but she didn't know where all these walls were going to come from, or where all these opportunities were going to come from. She just started with the very first one. And I was in Venice Beach last fall walking around, and boom, I saw one of her Buddha walls, and I knew it. I knew it was hers from 4 blocks away. And I said, oh my gosh, here's one of the 10,000 Buddha walls. And I was so excited, and I took pictures in front of it. And they emit this very peaceful feeling. I don't know how many she's painted by now, but I'm sure she's 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 10,000 Buddhas into it. I'm sorry, 5,000 Buddhas into it by now. I don't know. But that's a great example of somebody that comes up with this kind of nutty idea. How in the world are you going to paint 10,000 Buddhas? And she's really created a thing with it. It's affecting a lot of people in a very positive way.
Right. Planning is one thing, and it has its perks, but sometimes it's better to just jump in and just kind of get lost in the experience of it and just start that first Buddha, or whatever your Buddha is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the worksheets in the book, can you talk about like why that's important, and also why it's important for people to, you advise them to like not type up their answers in a word processor, but to like write it out in like a notebook. So can you talk a little bit about why that's important?
Yes, I think it's crucial if you're going to grow in any endeavor, and then speaking specifically to artists, if you are going to grow your creativity, if you're going to grow your art business, if that's what you have, if you're going to grow your art career, there's only one way to really grow. And that is you have to know what you're growing towards. And to figure that out, exactly what you want, you really need to sit down with a pen in your hand and a piece of paper. Because by writing with your hand on paper, your hand is an extension of your heart. And it's this energy that comes from your heart. Your heart's actually a transmitter. It's actually, there's science to this, where your heart emits this electromagnetic energy, and it literally comes from the deep recesses of your subconscious. So while at the surface of your mind, you might say, I don't really know what I want. But when you start writing on a piece of paper, what do I want? And then you think, well, I'm just going to keep writing until it comes out. And you write, well, I want to be happy. Well, what does that look like? Well, I want to be able to take a walk on the beach every day. Well, that means I want to live at the beach. Well, that means I want a little freedom in my day. So that means that just one thing leads to another. And then to get crystal clear on how much money you want to make, and what you want to be doing with your time every day, and what you want your weeks and your months to look like. And all that starts with sitting down and writing it out. And you don't just do it once, and you don't just do it with one thing. If you can sit down and even just for 10 to 15 minutes every morning and write out, what do I want my day to look like? By writing it, you're discovering what you want in the process of writing, and then you're declaring that you're going to have it. And by declaring it, everything comes together for you. So sometimes I get really scattered because I am really ADD, and I'm all over the place, and I have to sit down every morning and write out, what do I want today to look like? How do I want to feel? Well, I'm being interviewed by Young Men Brown today, so I want to feel happy and loving, and what result do I want? I want to only talk about things that are going to help people. And what are those things going to be? Well, I don't know, but I want them to be pulled out of me during the interview. And I actually did that before our interview today. But you can do that with everything in your life, what do I want this year to look like, or what do I want this day to look like? What do I want this relationship to look like? If you fall in love with someone, what do you want it to look like? So going back to my book, my book is very business centered, although it does have a lot of conceptual things thrown in there, heart-centered things, spiritually centered things, but it's mostly designed to help people make money with their art. And so the exercises in my book are to get people in the habit of sitting down and writing things out. So I give specific questions. And the feedback that I'm getting from people is phenomenal. Wow. I never really sat down and wrote this stuff out. And it's helped me get clarity on what I want. And that's the magic of it.
Absolutely. And yeah, it is one of the hardest things to do especially when you're thinking about your big goals, like what you want out of life. And I think to break it down to, daily goals and what you can get out of a day really helps. But it is scary to make those big goals, because by kind of declaring what you want, and I think that's what holds a lot of people back from doing this exercise, is that it makes this goal out there that you can not reach, you know what I mean? And if you don't talk about the goal, then you don't have anything to fail towards, if that makes sense. I don't think I worded that right, but like being able to write it down and have your intention, have your kind of declaration, at least then you have a goal, something to work towards, an intention to go towards, as opposed to just kind of going through your life without thinking about what you really want out of it.
Well, and having the clarity on what you want. Let's say it is a big goal that scares you and you're like, gosh, I really want to, let's say, I mean, I've heard a lot of artists tell me I'd love to do what you and Drew are doing. I'd love to have the freedom to travel around the world and create art as I go and sell art as I go. So let's say that's such a huge jump from where you might be right now. How in the world do you get to that? Well, just knowing that that's your goal, right? And you're working towards it. When you have that clarity, then every decision you make will lead you either closer to that goal or further away. So I always tell people, if you want to travel and you want freedom, don't do things that are going to tie you down. You just bought a puppy? Well, you might have to wait 18 years to travel because it's really hard to find people to watch your dog while you're gone for 3 months. And it's cruel to leave your dog for 3 months. You know, I mean, that's just one example, but you know, there are things that people do. You just, you know, like I have a friend who always says she wants the freedom to travel. And then she went and bought this 4,000 square foot house and is so stretched financially, she can't even go away for the weekend. And I said, okay, now there's nothing wrong with being homebound if that's what you want. But did you really want that? Because you told me you wanted to travel. She made a decision that just knocked that goal off the plate. And so that's why it's important to write it down, because when you have it written down, then every decision you make, you think, does this take me closer to it or further from it? If you want to make $5,000 a month, let's say that's your dollar goal off your art. And let me just say, I know artists that are making $30,000 a month. Okay, I work with artists that make $30,000 a month, and it's very possible. And I just wanted to throw that in there. But let's say your goal is to make $5,000 a month. And then you get this beautiful golden opportunity, and I'm saying quote unquote facetiously because you can't see me. I'm doing air quotes right now, golden opportunity to spend a week teaching children at a school for no pay. Okay, that doesn't take you closer to your goal of $5,000 a month. It just threw you back further away from it. So knowing that your goal is $5,000 a month and you've got $3,000 on the books already of commissions, you need $2,000. This is what you would do. You look at your goal, well, I need $5,000 a month. You tell the school, I could do it, but you have to pay me $2,000. Now that sounds so no-brainer, right? Mm-hmm. There are people listening going, yeah, right. That's like the stupidest thing. Like if I knew I could get $2,000, I'd ask for it. Not true. You can get money when people, okay, I'm going to prove this point right now with something that just happened 4 days ago. My husband got a job doing a live painting at a surf contest event. All right, this is where I'm afraid to throw the numbers out there, but I'm going to do it anyway. He got paid $7,000 to do a 2-day event plus airfare and hotel. One of his good friends who is in a similar industry, not art, but the surf industry, was there working at the event. And they had a conversation and the friend said to him, well, that's really nice of you to be here painting on the beach for people. And Drew said, well, I got paid for it. And the guy said, what? You got paid? And Drew said, you didn't get paid? And he said, no, it just covered my travel. So if you don't ask, you won't get paid.
Right. And what I love about that story too, and I think one of the most powerful things that I've learned from my guests on this podcast is the idea of doing things differently or not going the route that everyone else goes, kind of like trying to get in the same galleries as everyone else is trying to at the same time. And I know definitely that you and Drew share this kind of mindset. So could you talk about maybe other ways that you were non-conventional?
Well, when it comes to art licensing, I think we really do a lot of non-conventional things there, and that's benefited us financially quite well because, well, I don't know how much your audience knows about licensing, so I'll try to keep it really basic, but licensing your art means you're allowing a company to print your art on their products. And 98% of the artists out there that are making money licensing their art, they're licensing their art for coffee mugs and t-shirts and things that you see in Target or Walmart, just everyday goods. We sidestep the companies that are licensing the art, that are working with a large stable of artists, because those companies, they pay nothing up front and they pay very little. And instead, we target niche industries like the marijuana industry, huge, lots of money. If your art is perfect for it, you're going to get paid really well. We also work with the complete opposite industry, which is tech companies and software companies. And we'll license Drew's art to them for special campaigns, or they might have one little advertising campaign. And those companies are used to paying mega bucks for their advertising campaigns or for their special events, anything that they're doing. And I know, we don't have enough time to really go into the nitty-gritty of this because there's a lot more to it. But if you can think, okay, if you're experiencing like a situation where you're not getting paid enough, and let's say your art is perfect in an industry like, let's say, the skateboarding industry. So you put your art on skateboards, but you're finding that you're really not getting paid very much. But you have a little bit of a following. People love your art. You can take that skateboard art outside of the skateboard industry and license it to companies that want that cool factor, but they have a lot more money than skateboard companies do. And that's really what we had to do with surf, because Drew does surf art, but the surf industry has no money. They pay nothing. Almost nothing. So we don't even work with surf companies anymore. We stopped a long time ago. And we take Drew's surf to companies that want to look cool with the surf factor, but they're not in the surf industry. So that's really another non-conventional thing we've done.
I love it. Yeah. Kind of like we were talking about before, just taking the time to really think and to get creative. You're already a creative person, to get creative about like kind of where you can go into. And you definitely get into that a lot in your book. So I can't recommend your book highly enough. And it's something that we try to do on this show, is dispel the myth of the starving artist. And I think you do a very eloquent job of doing that in your book. And I also love how your book breaks it down, because starting an art career or kind of going that direction can seem like this like giant impossible puzzle where you don't even know where to start, and you break it down for people very effectively. So
thank you. Thank you for saying that. I really was thriving when I think that was one of the really hard things about this book, because I'm so ADD. I was just like throwing all this stuff together, and the hardest part for me was what I wanted to do, and I believe I pulled it off, is give someone a roadmap where this is where you start. You start with where you are right now. And that's the idea behind all those writing exercises, is putting you on that path, one foot in front of the other, and just keep going on that path. And not everything's going to happen overnight. People have to realize this. You're not an overnight success. To become successful, it could take years. And and if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can do it part-time. And my book applies to people doing this part-time. A part-time artist. You still should make money as an artist, whether you're doing it part-time or full-time. You should be paid for it. And anybody who thinks that you shouldn't be paid for art, do not buy my book, because you'll hate it.
I love it. Well, and you end your book with a call to action to create without fear. So I was hoping maybe we can end this interview in a similar fashion with you giving us the final push. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions without fear.
Yes, I'm talking to you, every single one of you out there right now. This is what I really want you to think about and to feel. And that is that your path is your own path. Don't look at what other artists are doing when you want to know what you're supposed to be doing. Follow your own instincts and your own inklings and your own intuition. because that is going to lead you to where you're supposed to be, even if it doesn't fit in with what other people are doing. And if it doesn't fit in with other people are doing, it's probably going to be a greater success than you ever imagined. So do your own thing and feel good about it.
Perfect advice. Maria, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And shout out to Drew too, because he's a very talented artist, and I'm so into what he does with sacred geometry, and just a very talented artist. So shout out to him.
Well, thank you. I will. And you know what? We should get him on your show.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
let's do that. He's a great talker. You'll love him.
A great talker.
Yes.
Very cool. All right. And if you want to find out more about Maria or get her book, you can head to mariabrophy.com. A very great blog if you want to check out the blog before you buy the book. Lots of great advice there. And you can get her book on Amazon in the Kindle version or the print version. You can find her on Instagram at Maria Brophy. And we'll have everything that we talked about today linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Maria Brophy. Maria, thanks again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
A hugely powerful episode. My thanks again to Maria for coming on this show. So many really good points in this episode, but two that I really want to bring to light here. And the first is the procrastination due to fear that can come when we get close to finishing a project. And this is a tricky one because I think a lot of times it can take the form of perfectionism, where we're 90% of the way through a project and we just find all of these little tweaks to make with it. And a lot of times we blame that on perfectionism, on wanting it to be just right. And that's true. We do want our projects to be just right. But as we talked about a lot before in the show, it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to get it exactly right. And when you look back on it, even after you think you've gotten it perfect, 2 years later, you're going to find some flaws in it because you're going to change as an artist too. You're going to change as a creative person as well. So if you're at that point where you're almost finished a project and there's all these things that you keep finding wrong with it, or all these little tweaks that you want to make with it, ask yourself, is it because it's not perfect yet? Or is it because I'm afraid for it to be done? Because I don't know what's going to happen after it's done when I have to start promoting it. We talk all the time on the show about kind of completely ignoring that whole thing until after the project is done. So you've been effectively doing that for 90% of the project. You've been not thinking about, how to promote it. Will this sell? How will it be received? Continue to not think about that for the remaining 10% of the thing until it is officially done. I know it's really hard, especially when you get close to it, when you're getting that excitement of the fact that this thing is almost done. But make sure that fear of you having to promote it, of you having to show it and give it birth into the world and show it off, make sure that doesn't stop you from finishing the thing and really delaying the inevitable, that you are going to finish this thing that you started, that you're almost done. Just get it done and then worry about all that stuff so you can move on to your other projects as well. And the other big one, and you already know what I'm going to say because I talk about it all the time, it's the power in writing things down. But for today, we're not going to talk about just writing down your ideas, but the big one, what you want out of life. We even talked about this last time with Matthew Miller about writing down where you want to be in 1 year, where you want to be in 5 years. You hear it all the time. You hear me mentioning this all the time. And you're probably rolling your eyes that I'm mentioning it again. But I want to ask you, have you actually done it? Have you actually done this very, very simple yet profound exercise of writing down and declaring where you want to be in your life? So that's my challenge for you today, is to make that declaration and really figure out what you want out of not just your creative life, but your life as a whole. And once you clearly define where you want to be and you know specifically where you want to be, instead of this kind of general idea that you want to be an artist or a creative person who makes money and who isn't doing this blood-sucking job that you're kind of currently a slave to, once you can get specific, that's when you'll start getting those ideas on how to get there, like Maria was talking about. Sometimes even after an hour of making that declaration, you'll start to see that roadmap because you asked for it. You actually figured out what you wanted and you asked for it. And if long-term is too much, take the short-term. And that's actually my real challenge for you is write down what you want your day to look like today, what you want your today to look like, or what you want your weekend to look like if you're listening to this before the weekend. I did this for myself for this coming weekend because I'm actually heading to the beach for a nice little 4-day mini vacation. And I wrote down a goal for myself to relax. That's something I have not been doing recently. I've been working very hard. I have not been sleeping a lot. I've been getting ahead on my own creative kind of pursuits, but I need to relax a bit. And I have also written down goals for what I want to do with my writing. I'm kind of taking a little bit of a break from the podcast. We're going to have a repeat episode on Monday, but one of my favorites. So stay tuned for that and definitely listen back or listen for the first time if you haven't before. But just getting to my own things, I've been doing that recently and it's been so fulfilling, and it feels like I'm a different person because I'm able to get these things out of me. So I'm making that a priority. And I wrote that down. I wrote down exactly what I wanted to get out of this little mini vacation: rest, relaxation, and also getting back to my own creative pursuits. So do it. Right after the music is over for this episode, write down what you want out of this day, this weekend, this week, or even go deeper, go longer, go for what you want out of your life, out of the next year, out of the next 5 years, whatever it is. Just write it down. And I think you'll be surprised at what the universe has to offer for you once you make that declaration. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. Go pick up Maria's book if you need a little extra inspiration, art, money, success. We'll have that linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/Maria Brophy or yourcreativepush.com/239. I love you all. Have a wonderful, productive, creative weekend, and we will see you on Monday if you need that push again. I love you all. I think I said that already, but I really do. I love you twice. Have a great weekend. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.